Welcome back to the conference and now for this keynote presentation, which should last about 45 minutes, and then we're hoping that we'll be inundated with questions, and then we'll have another 10 minutes or so of Q&A. And we encourage you, please, to post those questions in the chat box on the right of your screen. And there's also a Q&A function in one of the icons you'll see there. You can pose questions there as well. And hopefully I'll pick those up. And once we're done with the formal presentation, I will then read those questions out for Michael. Also to add, if there are any technical issues that you're having, please go to the reception and then navigate to the lounge tab, the one I was telling you about. And in the lounge tab, right at the very bottom of all the tables, there's a table for technical assistance. Just click on that and send your message, and our technical support team will be monitoring that throughout the presentation as well. In fact, throughout the rest of this conference. So it's my pleasure to introduce you today to Dr. Michael Leiter. Michael is professor of psychology at Acadia University in Nova Scotia, Canada, and also director of the Center for Organizational Research and Development there. And this is a research group that really looks into key human resource issues confronting organizations today. Michael also holds the Canada Research Chair in Occupational Health and Wellbeing at Acadia, and he is a registered psychologist in Nova Scotia, Canada. Michael has received ongoing research funding now for nearly 30 years from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, as well as from numerous international foundations for his work and research on job burnout and worker engagement, for which I'm not trying to embarrass him here. He is internationally renowned. He is now the co-author of a great new book on burnout, The Burnout Challenge, Managing People's Relationship with Their Jobs. And we're going to give away 5 copies of this later on today, as I said earlier on. This book, which I've read, and it's fascinating, and I highly recommend it. It has received positive acclaim from a number of well-known publications. And what I'd like to do is just read just one of these. And this comes from Adam Grant, who is a New York Times #1 best-selling author. And let me read it out to you. It says, "Burnout seems to be everyone's problem, and this book has solutions." As trailblazers in burnout research, Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter didn't just clear the path to study the causes, they've also discovered some of the cures. And end quote. No pressure now, Michael. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Michael Leiter.
Hello, it's very good to be here and to be able to talk to you about job burnout today. It is a topic I've been paying attention to for quite a long time. I read Christina Maslach's first article on burnout back in the 1980s, and I said, this is an important issue and something that I want to pay attention to. So I just phoned her up out of the blue and said, I'd like to come work with you on this. And she said, fine. And I went out to UC Berkeley, and we worked together that year. And we've been writing stuff together ever since then. And this book, The Burnout Challenge, is our latest, and trying to pull together our ideas and work over the years and see how this is going to run. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, give you the broad outlines of the ideas that we've been working with, and give some direction on how to approach this issue of burnout, how to prevent, how to develop workplaces that are really engaging people in their work. Now, what we talk about as burnout is a syndrome. For following, the words of the World Health Organization and its latest International Compendium of Diseases, and how it dealt with burnout first it said it was not a disease. It's not a disease. It's a workplace phenomenon. And you go, well, what is a workplace phenomenon? And it's somewhat parallel to chronic unemployment. They say that chronic unemployment, like burnout, is not a disease, but it is a distressing condition that can then lead to both mental and physical distress. And so that's in line with the work that we've done, as well as their definition of burnout is not just being exhausted, but it's this syndrome of being exhausted combined with being cynical, depersonalized, really distant, and losing your sense of efficacy at work. That is how it works. It's these three things together that really define burnout. And back in the 1990s, Christina Maslach and I, we wrote a book called The Truth About Burnout. And in there, we position burnout as a contrast with a state of engagement, really the opposite end of those three dimensions, being energetic, being dedicated, having a feeling of being effective in your work, that really was what we were seeing as being the contrast. Because when you do a survey of a lot of people working, particularly people who are currently working, only a few of them are really experiencing burnout and its full manifestation of all three of those aspects. Most people actually they're doing okay. And we need to sort of define what that is. And part of what came out of that thinking is that these dimensions of how much energy you have, that subjective feeling of being energetic, how involved you are, how dedicated, how much you can really attend to the people you're talking to, the ideas that you're thinking about, the ideas that you're reading. Can you really get your head focused on that? That was the second part. And this confidence that you are doing important work and doing it well, that these really is the contrast point with burnout and where people want to be in terms of their work. So the idea of burnout also is that it's an ongoing chronic kind of condition that we're asking, well, how often do you feel these things? The fact, like one of the key items is I feel tired in the morning before I start a day at work. And if you feel that way a couple times a year, it just might mean you have an interesting social life. But if you feel that way a few times a week or every day, that's a problem. That's a kind of problem. And also with that item, it's feeling tired before the day even begins. If you feel tired at the end of the workday, it might just mean that you worked hard. And that's not so much of a problem as long as you can recover your energy through relaxing, getting some distance from work, or even during the workday, have a pace that allows you to get intensely involved at times, but then be able to back off for a bit and bring your ideas and your energy together and get back going again. So it's this idea with burnout is that recovery is upset as well. You're not able to get back on track in terms of your energy. You're not able to put that energy into getting involved in really doing important work that you believe in. So that's that kind of framework that we were, looking at. More recently, we said, well, what's going on actually in between being fully engaged and enthusiastic about your work and being burned out? Like that can't be the only two possibilities. So when we started looking at some large databases on this, we discovered that you can identify there's a lot of people for whom their only issue is exhaustion. They're not cynical or feeling ineffective. In fact, it'd be somebody like a obstetrician who is helping babies come into the world day after day, but their sleep is being interrupted. There's not enough staffing so that they're working more shifts than really they should be, but they really believe in what they're doing and they are so involved in it. They're bringing new life into the world and it's just bringing joy to their heart. They're not burned out, but they really are tired. it's a whole different kind of thing of just being overextended is different in that way. And then you find, well, there's other folks in the same workplace have a whole different kind of solution, that they aren't actually exhausted, but they are really cynical. They've lost confidence in the leadership. They've lost confidence in the capacity to do good work here. They will probably explain to you, that they're actually have a good sense of efficacy. They believe in themselves. They just don't maybe believe in other people who are working around them and could explain that they could run this place much better than anybody who's running it now. They have all that confidence, but they're not really involved, and they're not really they're just really sort of separate from the situation. So that kind of disengaged kind of profile is another one that we see. And then the third one is people who, they're not exhausted, they're not cynical, but they're not really getting experiences that are making them feel really effective and of consequence. So they're just sort of, it's just a job, and they're going through, doing what needs to be done, but it's not really fulfilling their sense of efficacy and agency. They're not really having that. So there are folks for whom there are just problems on only one of these dimensions, but then there's another percentage, which could be, depending on the workplace, maybe less than 10%, other places up to 20%, who really have all three of those qualities. They're feeling really exhausted continually. They're really lost that capacity to be fully involved and engaged in things, and they lost that sense of efficacy. And that combination is what burnout is all about. So that starts populating some of that area between burnout and engagement with these other profiles of overextended, disengaged, and ineffective. But still basing the psychological connection with work on these basic dimensions of energy, how involved you are, and how confident you are in terms of your effectiveness and your efficacy at work. So that is sort of the experience of the person. That's the subjective experience. And then the next piece is, well, where's that coming from? What is the nature of the situation that's leading to that? And what we talk about a lot in the book, and sort of our perception of all this, is that really burnout is a relationship crisis. It's the relationship of people with their workplaces. It's not a disease. It's not something that's seated within the individual as some kind of inherent flaw in how they're put together. It's really, the problem resides somewhere between the person and the workplace. It's in that in-between space, which is where relationship problems lie. When people have a relationship problem, it doesn't mean that clearly one person is wrong and the other person is totally right. Most relationship problems are a bit more complex than that. And it is that way with this kind of relationship problem between people and their work, that there's something that the person is looking for that's not happening. There's something that the workplace is looking for that's not happening. And there's this tension. So we talk about mismatches between the person and the workplace, of what they're looking for in terms of workload. Is there, the amount of it, the time of day that it comes, how complex the workload is, how suited it is to the person's aspirations of what they want to be doing in their career, that kind of issue is there an alignment between the kind of work and the amount of work and the timing of work that the person has in mind and the workplace, what it's providing? Because there's all these expectations and obligations and demands that lie in that kind of working relationship, going in both directions. Workplaces have of employees, and employees have of workplaces. Others are reward. that sense of reward, that appreciation of monetary reward, of just intrinsic satisfaction of doing work. Community, which is a big one highlighted there, that is that quality of relationships at work. People want to belong to a community when they go to work. They want a sense of belonging. They want a sense of, I'm part of this group, and it's also, uh, I'm a valued member of this group. I'm not just somebody they're putting up with, but I'm really somebody that matters within this group. And that gets realized in my interactions with people day in and day out. Fairness is an important. Is there a match between what you consider to be fair treatment of yourself, of your customers, of your colleagues, and what you're viewing at work? And then values we find as a very fundamental piece that I think more and more when you look at how people approach their work, that they're approaching it with values that they want to realize through their career. That could be very directly related to the kind of work they're doing, or could be very broad values in terms of equality, or in terms of environmental sound treatment of the world around you, that these kinds of things. So there's a match between the values people want to realize and the ones that are really being furthered by the workplace that they're involved in. So what we see is that when the greater the mismatches between what people are looking for, what their aspirations are, and the realization and their interaction with the workplace, the more that things are going to be pushing towards exhaustion and cynicism and that lack of accomplishment. A thing that we've worked on of late has been really focusing on the community part of thing, with the idea that if people are really going to be working at their best in terms of customer service, in terms of developing ideas and creativity, attention to detail, whatever it is, that's going to happen a lot more readily within a environment, a social culture that people feel respected and valued by their colleagues. And people are very, very astute at reading the signals. Am I really valued by people? Like, of every interaction that you have, when you say good morning, does somebody actually respond? Do they respond in a way that you feel, oh, that was a nice little interaction? Or are you going, what the heck was that? When you're going by some people and so you can work with groups. What we do is we sort of call it family therapy with work groups. And you just go in and start saying, how do we get more of the positive interactions going? And as we get more of that happening, things become more real, things become more solid with folks. Because you find that there's a big relationship between the amount of rude interactions people encounter and where there's the amount of exhaustion and cynicism they're reporting. And then when people are exhausted and cynical, they also have a very hard time being charming and pleasant in their interactions with other people. So you get something that just tends to keep itself going, becomes perpetuating. So that's something that we've been working on, a methods for improving the quality of those relationships so that there is less of a pressure towards burnout going on. And that's the kind of thing, like, can we get a match between what people are looking for in terms of their sense of belonging and what the workplace is providing? So these are the kinds of things. Now, one thing we really emphasize in a lot of the work that we do is leadership, the role of leadership in addressing, preventing burnout, and helping people find the kinds of matches that make a difference for them in their work. So taking care of themselves and taking care of their people. And when we do big surveys and look at folks who are in leadership positions, from first line supervisors or managers up the line, the one thing that we regularly find as mismatches for leaders, it has to do with workload, sort of unmanageable workload. And part of that is just the kinds of things that you got to deal with. when you're in any kind of leadership position. And one of them is that, backing up the unit means that it's on your mind a lot. And with some kind of operations, it means that they're going to call you up at night and say, we got a real problem here. And you go, well, I'd like to have my personal time to myself, but also I want to know what's going on in my work unit, the place that I'm in charge of. I don't want to come back the next morning and say, oh, it was a mess last night. It was a total disaster, but we didn't want to bother you. You go, well, actually, I really would like to know what's going on, that kind of idea. But it means that there's less time of just being completely separate from work, that you keep keeping your eye on it all the time. It's on your mind. This boundary between what is work and what's not work, that porous boundary, particularly evident for people who have leadership responsibilities when you think about it. There's also just voracious administrative tasks. There are a lot of things that seem like, really, why are we doing this? Is this really adding value to things? With one organization, we were talking about that first line managers were particularly distressed because, they had to go through a lot of rigmarole to get overtime approved for people in the units. It was a healthcare operation. It was clearly understaffed, during the pandemic and afterwards. They had, regularly had to approve overtime just to have the basic minimal staffing on their units. But still, the first line managers had to go through a lot of steps and approvals up the line to have that just in place, that they would have their staffing in place. And they said, well, this is just adding a lot of administrative nonsense to the job I'm trying to do here. And it was one of those things after, and having gotten that feedback on a big survey, that was a quick win. You could change that procedure. You could say, okay, no, we're taking out a lot of that. We'll be watching, what's going on with approving overtimes, but we don't have to go through all these steps along the way. Because what I find is that for people in healthcare, there's a lot more administrative nonsense fatigue than there is compassion fatigue. That's really what wears people out and makes them feel like their precious time is being frittered away by the structure that they're working in, not because of any lack of commitment on their part. And that starts wearing away at their capacities. Other people's agendas, that's another thing that leaders are always dealing with. People have ideas about how they should be doing their job, and they've got to manage that in a polite way, hopefully. Mission creep, organizations love adding more and more things, and they really are hesitant to say goodbye to any of their domains or responsibilities. So things just keep growing. And attending to difficult people, it's a big part of any kind of leader's job on any level. And so those are the kinds of things. And you go, well, I just want to do my job and run my unit here properly and get our mission accomplished. And there's so many things that distract in that way. And I think, it adds to that idea that while people in leadership positions are usually more content with their level of control or reward or value realization, workload is a regular kind of issue that is a challenge there. But it's not the only thing, because as with people at all levels of the organization, people in leadership positions, they have issues that they're bringing. They have aspirations, they have hopes, they have motivations. Again, that sense of belonging, a sense of, are you able to have experiences at work that confirm that you are actually making the impact that you want to have? This sense of agency or autonomy. People really thrive on having at least some of their time at work where they feel like they're making things happen. They're not just on the receiving end of other people's agendas, but they're actually, initiating something and something that they can hang their hat on and say, okay, that was there. So which means a bit of freedom from some of the constraints and policies that keep everything just so all the time. And again, people bring values, personal values, professional values, way that they really think the work ought to be done in terms of a level of artisanship, a level of customer service, of patient care, of uh, refinement and kinds of the work that they do. And so the question is, what are those aspirations and values meeting when they go to work? And what we're finding is that when those things, any of those things are thwarted, there's a little nudge towards the burnout direction, a little nudge away from being really fully engaged in their work, and that's the particular dynamic that's going on with these things. So what you're working on then, looking after yourself in that way, and it's been, a section of the book, and there's a appendix where you sort of give a little structure for looking at that, of thinking about and reflecting on the matches and mismatches in your own work life, of just taking a while and, at the end of the day, you're taking a bit to reflect and going over those 6 areas of work life and what's going on with control and reward. Is that working for me here, or was there really clearly some mismatches in what's going on? And can you look at something that actually happened today at work that represented either a really good alignment of these things that really came together beautifully, or that you really felt at odds? So getting an idea of what those things are. And then after you've done that for a while and able to get some kind of direction, you develop a strategy about how can you put your goals and the context in which you're working to align a bit better. What are some strategies that allow that to develop so that things can be more matched rather than mismatched, and looking towards an outcome to improve energy, involvement, and confidence in what you're doing. So those are the structure, the framework of what's going on with these things, so that a way you can sort of approach it on your own. There's only so much you can do on your own, but there is a bit you can do on your own in order to get your work context better aligned with what it is you're looking for in your career, in your job. And then the other focus for leaders is, well, what about the people reporting to you? How are we dealing with this? And so this is sort of an overall general model about whether you're looking at an organization with thousands of people, or your work group with 20 people, or whatever it is, any kind of a level, about how do you approach this, and how do you do something that makes a difference in your role as a leader in your organization, in a management kind of role. So listening is, we talk about in the book, collaborate, customize, and commit. And so I'm going to elaborate a little bit on this, because that's sort of where the action part of our agenda resides. So the first thing in terms of collaborate, it really means it begins with listening. It doesn't end with listening, but it begins with listening. And one thing that I've focused on a lot of my consulting work of late is helping organizations make the most of the surveys that they do, because there are a lot of surveys that happen in the world. There are people who argue there are too many surveys happening in their work life and beyond. There's a lot of them going on, and I find that they don't make the most of the situation, and it is an imposition on people. It takes up time and energy and sort of interrupts their flow to be doing these things, and it is, I think, beholden on anybody who's making that kind of intervention to make the most of it, to demonstrate they really are listening and they really are responding in a meaningful kind of way. So making the most of those surveys in terms of the questions you ask, how you respond to the question, to the answers to those questions, how you analyze them, how you make sense out of them. And that's the beginning point for collaborating with people, is really listening. And then, moving from that listening into an active dialogue. And so on a small level, it's just talking to people and finding out what's going on. On a big level, it requires, surveys and data analysis on a more sophisticated scale. But it is, in either case, the beginning point for collaborating to say, we're going to develop our workplace together. I don't have all the answers all by myself. It's going to be something we do together. And then the customized part of it is to build on the local culture. It's not just taking a best practice out of the box and applying it, but it is recognizing that this group, whatever work group or organization, whichever level that you're interacting with, that whatever good ideas you've got, they need to be adapted. There needs to be it's creative solving, problem solving, creative problem solving, and not just applying a template that moves people. And part of that active involvement of people and coming up with solutions and realizing them and putting them in place, that active involvement is integral to the process of things improving. You may not have escaped your notice that a lot of people are really cynical about workplaces, about leadership, about whether things are going to improve. And the process through which these things are put into place can be how credibility is built and applied. And then the third piece is commitment, and which requires a real investment. It means things have to endure. Like burnout is the kind of problem that you find that how people score on the burnout scale today will correlate strongly with how they fill out complete the same assessment a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because people often, continue to stay the same, and work situations often stay fairly stable. And so that condition can continue for quite a long time. And so the solutions means not just do a quick change in things, but change things fundamentally, assure that they stay changed, and assess carefully to make sure that the direction is going where you intended to and where you're hoping it does. So that is just sort of a very broad look at that process of how you work with an organization to go from listening to customizing things to that situation, and then making a commitment to actually improve things over time in terms of practices, policies, just ways of doing things from day to day. So that's sort of the big picture there. And this next bit goes into that a little more deeply, because what I find, there's been tons and tons of research on what causes burnout and what are some of the downstream impacts of people experiencing burnout. There's very little really in terms of demonstrating a action that makes a difference. And I think it's something that really needs to be focused on a whole lot more, and that the action that makes a difference needs to focus on how people experience their workplace, because again, we're looking at it as a relationship problem, a breakdown between people, what they're looking for, and what the workplace is providing for them. So that is and it begins, again, as I said before, just talking a bit more about this idea of dialogue and a survey or a conversation, whichever level you're going at, that you're getting an exchange of ideas about how people are experiencing their work. And one question, in terms of, in addition to like the questionnaire items that we have, there's a couple of open-ended questions that we've had in some recent surveys that I think are really valuable in this way. And one of them is a pebble in your shoe. Describe something in your work that you're experiencing as a pebble in your shoe. A pebble in your shoe, the idea is that it's annoying. It's not crippling. It's not devastating, but it really is annoying because that kind of little thing that's wearing away and just irritating day after day, or that kind of stuff, that kind of stuff leads to burnout. Doesn't have to be traumatic. It doesn't have to be major, but the little stuff can just, like, why isn't it just running smoothly here at work? Why is this annoying? It's that thing I talked about with approving the overtime. Like, it was just sort of an annoyance for people. It wasn't, like the end of the world, but it certainly was annoying. So that's the kind of, and then also asking as an open-ended, what are two ways to improve things here? And just asking right at the beginning, how can we do things? What do you have any ideas for doing things better? And to be able to capture those kinds of ideas on your survey, in addition to the scores on the standardized questionnaires, are very valuable. You've got to then read them. And when you have a survey that we did recently was thousands of people in a large hospital, but there were over 300,000 words of written comments that people had to share about how they perceived their work life and how things were managed there. And you got to read all that stuff. You got to find out, okay, what is going on with people here? Why are they telling me so much about what's going on here? It's a sign that they care, but also it's a sign that they want a response to that. They want some kind of way of knowing that all these words that they shared and all these ratings that they rated, that they're hitting a target. Another thing is the analysis, that a particular thing that I'm struck by when you're looking at a large organization, particularly, that the segments of that organization can have such different dynamics going on. And what is the nature of whether it's being overextended or disengaged or burned out in one work group? The dynamics of that can be quite different from what's going on in another work group. And you need to be able to separate. I haven't found, with complex organizations, you don't get one pattern that fits everybody across there. So you've got to be able to distinguish and differentiate the kinds of interactions that are happening among people within work groups, between work groups. One of them is really dependent on another work group to get its job done, and how those dynamics are occurring becomes an important piece of the puzzle. So you've got to be able to look at that stuff in terms of social dynamics, in terms of these areas of work life. For one of them, the big issue is control, and another group, a big issue is going to be on rewards or value realization. Like what we found, some organization that the professional staff were much more vulnerable to experiencing burnout, particularly exhaustion and cynicism, when they felt their professional values were being, limited by the policies and practices and funding opportunities they had within the organization. But for the non-professional staff, that's sort of the support staff, their big issue was much more that sense of feeling ineffective, that they weren't so much their crises, mismatches at work weren't really driving exhaustion and cynicism so much, but they really were undermining their sense of accomplishment. So they had a really different kind of thing. And those problems are very distinct and call for very different kinds of solutions and reactions and action on the part of leadership. So you got to get down into the details of that and be able to separate those out in order to be able to grasp what's going on. And if the analysis goes too simple, too much on just the global level, you can miss a lot of the important nuances, which is where a lot of this stuff resides. With that. And then sharing these feedback sessions, then you got to go out and talk with people about what we found in this survey, or what came out of all these conversations that we had. And a good starting point on that is to say, well, these are, it's not just here's the average level on the burnout scale. People like those numbers, but they actually don't have a whole lot of, substance to them in that way. But what's really sort of matters, to talk to people about what were the pebbles that they identified. And you'll find that, well, generally, if somebody mentions it, other people are also resonating with that. And particularly in that, first feedback session, what are the actions that folks recommended? What kind of ideas do people have? They may be uh, logistically not very available, let's say, but this is what people were thinking about in terms of funding issues, in terms of staffing, in terms of new ways of doing the work, of uh, inefficiencies that can be taken out of the system. And that, so being able to start with that, saying, we heard you on this point, becomes an important part of the process that happens there. And because the objective is to both, is to hear what folks have to say and to be heard by them as well. And again, you're going to be heard a whole lot better if when you demonstrate that you're hearing them. Because again, the stuff that we've worked on in terms of workplace civility and that kind of stuff, that reciprocity has huge power. And however you approach people is going to solicit similar kinds of responses in return. So something to work on there and to build on that. The action, again, you're going to do some things, find some quick wins that address some of those pebbles and get those out of those shoes, and put some of those things in place. But you also, on a broader level, what is the process through which we're going to review some of the processes here? Are we going to do something like a lean evaluation of how the work is running in the particular segment? What we're going to do in order to really reflect on how the work is done, to see what the possibilities are for changing in a way that is more, amenable to how people want to be working here. So do generally just leaving it to leadership to look after it has some real, snags to it, and being able to set up some kind of a collaborative work group that's going to be tracking this, that's going to be accountable to people, more broadly in the organization. It's going to have a good communication strategy that's going to keep folks in the loop so that this is, something that they believe in was really a worthwhile kind of undertaking to have this dialogue, that becomes an important piece of the puzzle there. And then evaluation. Generally, the first place in terms of evaluating any program to change things is to be able to identify, did we change exactly what we meant to change in the way that we meant to change it? Because that's really your starting point. And you're hoping for some downstream impact on people's energy and involvement and sense of efficacy. We're trying to address these basic dimensions that underlie burnout. But did we change, the policy that we were going to do that? If we had something in place, in terms of that process for approving overtime, did we actually shorten the amount of steps that it takes for somebody to approve overtime? That's the first step. And then if we did, then you can see, did that have the impact we were looking for? Or was that just window dressing? And it really didn't. People were looking for something much more substantial in terms of change if they were going to get somewhere with this. So, and then ideally you've got some kind of a control group so you can tell, well, is that going to change anyway, or is that something that's there? And then a way to capture whatever the lessons are you learned. You've got to, it's a big experience, and it needs to be, you need your oral history or whatever of what happened during this process so that it becomes something that gets built upon. So this is, a whole process for thinking about how to change things within work groups and build something new and different in that way. So the basic overviews: burnout is this three-part syndrome. It's not a disease. It's more of a relationship crisis or even an existential crisis at work, much more than a disease. But the components are exhaustion, cynicism, and a lack of efficacy. That is the essence of what we're talking about with burnout. And any of those things can exist as an issue on their own, but when they come together, it becomes this self-perpetuating problem where it's people are too tired to try something new. They don't have trust and confidence in anybody else to, you know, receive help, and they don't believe in themselves anymore in terms of aren't they really effective in terms of getting things done. So it's a real stuck place to be. It's not great at all. Changing strategy, collaborate with people, customize solutions to the particular setting, and really commit over time. Uh, it means really focusing on people, designing work for people. And as people change, both within the job or the workforce that you're recruiting from change, then you've got to adapt to the people as they are and find a way to connect with them. Being responsive kind of leadership that listens and takes action in a response to the issues that people provide, as well as a cooperative kind of idea. So that is what I wanted to talk about today. I really appreciate this opportunity and hope that we can have some dialogue here about what we can.
Thank you, Michael. We I was expecting a presentation packed with all sorts of valuable insights,
Talk about.
and you did just that.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you.
I certainly have a number of questions I want to ask you, but I think I'll look at the chat first of all. There's a few questions there, and you might have answered some of these already somewhere in the many insights you've given us. But let me start with the first one I can see here. How do you support employees to handle burnout as a leader when they refuse all options and strategies available to deal with burnout? I'm just reading the question.
Okay. Who is it? They? I guess that means the people who are
I,
experiencing burnout
I believe so.
are refusing. Well, that is, yeah, that is a inherent problem with the burnout issue, and that people who are experiencing burnout are not in a receptive. They're not in a receptive mood at all. Again, feeling exhausted, feeling cynical, feeling a lack of efficacy is a very closed kind of place to be. Like, you got to know that's where you're starting from, and uh, the nice thing is that what we're thinking is that the main thing you got to do is act as a manager, as a leader, and the manager's job is looking at the parameters of how people get their work done and focusing on those. You're not a psychotherapist unless you are a psychotherapist, but generally most of you are not psychotherapists. So getting into the depths of their psychological crises is not really your territory and not really your expertise, but just figuring out what can you change about that person's work life? How much can you understand? What is the mismatch that they're experiencing? And you got to get some handle on that by watching, by listening, by talking to them, and then say, okay, can I change the parameters around their job so that that's mismatch? They've got a little bit more room just to fall into a better alignment between themselves and there. So I think it becomes that kind of strategy. You've got a charm offensive that's got to unfold in order to bring them on side, because they're not going to make it easy for you. That isn't what somebody experiencing burnout is about.
Absolutely. Michael, I don't know whether you've seen the thumbs up icons or the clappy eye icons. There's been quite a few of those towards the end of your presentation. So I just wanted to, there's some more claps coming up, even a heart. How about that?
Oh, wow.
Thank you for using the icons. The icons are always great. Let me just read another one. This is part comment and part question. It appears that burnout is outside of my sphere of influence because of the dynamics in my environment. Would you agree? So there's a part question there. How do I regain control, set boundaries? What can I do on my own? What if my leaders don't have time or interest to listen?
Okay, well, part of the job, at various levels in the organization is to keep educating the people that report to. So, making any kind of progress there is just part of the burden of being a first line or midline manager, and that piece has to be there. I guess what we talk about, more broadly is the idea that there's this concept called, job crafting. And job crafting is the idea of looking at what are the mismatches in your job and making tweaks in that. Now, to a certain degree, there's sort of stealth job crafting where you go, okay, I'm going to monitor things here for a while, figure out what are the mismatches that are really a problem for me or a problem for my people, and make a strategy of, okay, well, what can I tweak here that can make things just a little bit better? Again, you don't have to do drastic changes for these things, and drastic changes often, have their own challenges. But can I nudge it just a little bit better? Can I nudge it a little bit better without anybody noticing what I'm up to? So that's the stealth part of it. What can you slip in? How much latitude do you have? And often you have a bit more latitude than you might think, but you can test it and see, proceed on a no squawk basis. If you change things a little bit and nobody squawks, okay, well, maybe I could change it a little bit more. It's more effective if you can work with somebody else, even just one other person or a larger or a group or whatever. But the more that it's a shared undertaking, these kinds of tweaks, the more they've got some momentum, and the more you're probably not, like, if you decide just within your own job, this is a part of the job I really dislike. So I'm just going to do less of that and see if I can get away with doing less and less of that. And that could be good for you, but if you're doing that by dumping it on somebody else, you're creating problems for your colleagues, and that may come back and bite you. So being able to work on that together as a group and saying, okay, here's something none of us really like doing, this part of the job. How can we together make that a smaller part of what we're doing and have the really valued stuff a bigger part of what we're doing? So that's a kind of nudging it along until you can get your leadership to recognize that this is a problem they really do need to be addressing. That can take a while.
Well, there's a slightly related question that I'm going to read out. Many leaders don't acknowledge that they have a shared responsibility to drive the well-being agenda. They see it as HR's job. How can we change that attitude?
Well, I guess it's to me, it's pretty clear that in today's work world, like if you really are you in a company that's really doing serious work and being a serious player on whatever that you're doing, like, you need people to be fully present. You need people, not just part of their mind or part of their energy or part of their capacity to interact with people. You really need them to be there when they are at work, and that their sense of energy, that sense of involvement, that sense of efficacy is really fundamental to that happening. I think that, and being able, making that message prime thing of what's going on. If it's going to be essential. It's essential also for individuals to make sure that they're staying a step ahead of artificial intelligence or anything or any other kind of mechanization that wants to move in on their job space. So I think it's becomes an important piece of things, and I think, again, that's part of that mission that anybody in first or middle level management needs to keep getting that communication, that persuasive communication up the line. This is what we're all about. And, if you really have an employer who is really close to that, it is something to think about, well, strategically, where are they going to be? Because I find the upcoming workforce is so much involved with things that are core values, that a whole different kind of lifestyle involvement of how they want work to connect, that leaders really need to be flexible, sensitive, and on the ball with that stuff, or the company's going to be in trouble before too long.
Thank you, Michael. There are a lot of questions. We're not going to have time, and I'm hoping those questions are going to reappear in the debrief session so that we can bring them back to the roundtable a little bit later on. But let me ask, there's a simple one. I think the answer is a short one. Is there a specific survey available that can measure employee burnout?
The most widely used and definitive measure that gets to that exhaustion, cynicism, and efficacy, that measures those three qualities, and really was the one that the World Health Organization based their definition on. It's called the Maslach Burnout Inventory. It is, and there's variations. There's some that are really, there's a version that's really aimed towards healthcare, another towards teachers. There's one that's just general, whatever kind of work people are in. And there's a company called Mind Garden that licenses that or can run the survey with it. And then there are these other pieces for areas of work life or social encounters and other measures that you measuring not just their experience, but the burnout scale measures the experience the person has, but the other companion measures look at what is the work context, how are people perceiving their work context. And so that is the way to go. And again, they can run the survey or they can license people to run their own survey, whichever way. But those are the measures that are the primo measures for this.
Great. I'm going to save a couple of these questions for later. I think they'll go down well with the panel. Final question, I think, as we have 3 minutes left. And the question is this: what should I do if the employee in question who is suffering from burnout is not aware of his or her own situation or her own state of burnout?
Well, I think it's what if you're having that idea, you're clearly perceiving something that's going on with them. Giving them the label of burnout may or may not be helpful. I mean, it may not be really. Telling somebody, "Boy, are you burned out," is not really may not really brighten their day or get them working in the right direction. So you got to look at, I think, the specifics of what are you basing it on. And what we found, we did some studies. A number of years ago, where we were lining up patient satisfaction score ratings with the nurses' scores on the burnout scale, and we found that people actually are fairly accurate in identifying, aspects when who is more on the burnout side of things and who's more on the engaged side of things. So that perceptions there's something to it. Like, so you're looking at, well, what is it that you're catching? Is it that they're exhausted all the time? They're really tired. And then you can just focus on that issue of, rest, or do you need a break during how are you going to manage your energy through the workday? Or are you seeing that they're just being really cynical? Like, if people are just saying really cynical, snarky things about the clientele, that's a sign of that disengagement, that cynicism, and something that you'd want to just deal with that, saying, look, I know people can be annoying, but this is our clientele. Everything is based on providing services to these people. That's our whole reason for being here. So how are we going to get a more positive, work on developing a more positive attitude there? So I think it's really looking at what are the specific issues and problems that people are experiencing and getting right to that.
Michael, the last 45 seconds. We have a comment here. Knowledge workers today are more leaning towards work life and work life integration with fewer boundaries around. And says, please share your thoughts and advice in 30 seconds.
Well, work-life integration, it is something I think fundamentally that really needs to be thought through. The idea, I mean, there's so much of looking at jobs, talking about jobs as if we're like 19th century factory workers. And in a way, the time and space and work have become much more fluid. And again, what we can do at work, you can do things that relate to your personal life at work. When you're not at work, the place doesn't have much to do with it anymore. And so it becomes a matter of both for individuals and their employers to know that there's a problem here. There is something that part of the life challenge is to figure out how are you going to pace your energy, your attention, and your emotions related to work and not work. And that's just part of something we got to figure out these days. And the structure of time and place don't help you with that anymore. It's a whole new way of life skill to figure that out.
Thank you, Michael. Sadly, our time is up on this section. So we're going to move to the debrief sessions in a second. To do that, please hop onto the once the session ends, please hop onto the lounge tab. And when you get that, join one of those groups for short discussions and exchange of views. You've already provided us with quite a few questions here. Please continue with the chat, and the facilitators will gather those for us to use later on in the round table discussion. But for now, thanks very much.
Thank you.